Hello and welcome. I'm Ankit and you're watching the Daily News Simplified. Now, today being 4th of May, we'll be covering 7 important articles which we have taken up from the usual, the Hindu, Indian Express, and the Business Line newspaper. Now, before moving forward, please make sure to like this video as it helps us keep going. Now, without taking much of your time, we'll move straight away to the first article of the day, which you can see appeared in the Business Line newspaper. Now, this article, it highlights that it has been a decade that Indian defense sector has undertaken initiative to achieve self-reliance, that is Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, this article provides in detail the hits and misses related to the indigenization in defense sector. That first of all, self-reliance is leading to increased indigenized content in India's defense products. In addition to enhancing the participation of country's private sector as well as startup in manufacturing of defense equipments. Further, in the last financial year, it has led to record exports of defense products out of India because as much as $2.63 billion worth of defense equipments were exported out of India and into different countries. So not just this self-reliance in defense sector, it is intended to increase India's manufacturing capability. It will also help in increase India's export to other countries. Now, this article also highlights few misses that are challenges related to self-reliance in defense sector. So we'll be covering in detail these aspects in our today's first article's discussion. Now, these article, it is important from GS paper 3 syllabus because in the syllabus you will find indigenization of technology. Further, questions related to India's defense sector and attempts to increase investment in this particular industry has been subject of UPSC's question in the past. For example, in the mains of the year 2014, you saw a question on FDI in defense sector and its impact on India's defense and economy in both short and long term. So you can understand it is quite simple that self-reliance in defense industry means increasing the production of defense equipments in Indian territory itself. So in this regard, government has brought forward several schemes and initiatives which we will discuss later on. But first, let us discuss why is there a need for self-reliance in the defense sector in the first place. Now, you can understand India has several security concerns, both in its border areas and internal security imperatives. First, in India's border areas, India is witnessing border disputes with two of its neighbors. First is Pakistan and another one is China. So to deal with the mobilization of army by these neighbors, India has to mobilize its own army. So to give these armies the equipments, you have to have large set of equipments. But currently, India is dependent on imports to meet their requirements of India's armed forces. So we need self-reliance in India's defense sector to provide equipments to Indian armed forces such as army, navy as well as air force. Additionally, India also has some internal security imperatives such as dealing with challenges such as terrorism as well as Naxalism. Now, to deal with these challenges, you need to build the capacity up of your central armed police forces as well as police forces of respective states. So, to provide these forces the equipments, you also need to have large set of equipments. So that's why we need self-reliance. That first of all, you provide these armed forces and police forces with the necessary equipments, and you source these equipments from Indian companies as well. So this was first imperative on why we need self-reliance in the defense sector. That was India's security concerns, both internal as well as external. Now also in the recent times, India has increased its power projection in its immediate neighborhood, that is Indian Ocean region. So India acts as a regional power in the Indian Ocean region, which means in the Western Indian Ocean, India is fighting with attempts to combat sea piracy. Whereas in the east part of the Indian Ocean region, India wants to secure the sea lines of communication, especially near its strategic Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which is very much in the vicinity of the Strait of Malacca. So to protect both its western part of Indian Ocean region as well as eastern part, India needs to increase its naval deployment in the Indian Ocean region. So naturally, this increased naval deployment requires more ships as well as submarines. So these were all to be manufactured in India in the initiative for self-reliance. Further, these equipment such as ships and submarines, they will be weaponized by loading them with missiles and torpedoes. So manufacturing these missiles and torpedoes, it is also necessary to keep the cost low. So India's regional power imperatives, especially in the Indian Ocean region, it also requires scaling up of its naval deployment. So what better way is to manufacture all these required equipments in the Indian territory itself. So this is what self-reliance in defense industry is all about. Further, you can understand developing the manufacturing capability inside India to manufacture all these military equipments. It also has enormous an economic benefit because first of all, you will be increasing the employment in India. Further, you'll also reduce the amount of import that we currently have in order to meet our defense equipment's requirement. So reducing the import will also reduce India's current account deficit in the medium to long term. Further, setting up of manufacturing units in India will also require increased infrastructure development. So not just concerns related to infrastructural development and increased employment, but India's economic benefit by establishing a defense manufacturing unit in India, it also extends to decreasing India's imports as well as reducing India's current account deficit. Now, also, there is also a pillar that is technological advancement because you can understand fighting wars in modern era, it requires advanced military equipment such as combat drones, ballistic missile defense, fifth generation aircraft, hypersonic missiles. Now, all these emerging technologies, these are developed only by a handful of nations. And these developed nations who have achieved sufficiency in manufacturing of all these emerging technological equipments, they're apprehensive of sharing these technologies with other developing countries. So if any country, be it India, it has to technologically advance its own armed forces and ensure deployment of these technologies, you have to manufacture these technologies in India themselves. So therefore, as most of the countries who have developed these advanced weapons, they are apprehensive of sharing these weapons. So it is imperative for India to manufacture these weapons in Indian territory itself. So you understood security concerns with respect to India's border areas and internal security measures, the role of regional power in Indian Ocean region, the corresponding economic benefits, and achieving technological advancements. These are the reasons why we need self-reliance in the defense sector in the first place. Now, in this regard, the government of India has brought forward many initiatives. Let us discuss these initiatives one by one. Now, the first initiative was draft defense production and export policy, which was brought forward in the year 2020. Sorry. Now, through these policy, the government it intended to double the amount of defense production in India in the next 5 years. And in this regard, the defense ministry it also came up with defense acquisition procedure. And through this procedure, the defense ministry it wants to manufacture defense equipments under Make in India initiative, and it also wants India to become a global manufacturing hub. So you can understand in terms of policy wise, India brought forward draft defense production and export policy, and defense acquisition procedure to not just manufacture weapons in India and also to procure these weapons into Indian armed forces and other law enforcement agencies. Further, to promote collaboration between foreign original equipment manufacturers and Indian companies, the government of India, it brought forward what was known as strategic partnership model. Now, in this strategic partnership model, foreign companies and Indian companies, they collaborate to manufacture defense equipments in Indian territory itself. Now, this model has not taken off as of yet, but there are many instances that has highlighted the necessity of collaboration between a foreign original equipment manufacturer and an Indian company. The most latest example in this regard was the development and manufacturing of C295 aircraft, which was taken in India by Airbus, which is a European company, and Tata Advanced System Limited, which is an Indian company. Now, the supply of these aircrafts to the Indian Air Force will be taken by Airbus, and these aircrafts will be manufactured in India in the facilities of Tata Advanced Systems. So, this was the example that both private sector in India and foreign OEMs, they are collaborating to manufacture these main important equipments in Indian territory itself. So this can be taken up as a use case on why we should more and more encourage strategic partnership model in India. Now, for also to facilitate the interaction between private sector and Indian armed forces, the government has brought forward a portal named as Region Portal. Now, in this region portal, first of all, the government, it intends that the private sector will first identify what are the requirements of Indian armed forces, and then they'll interact with the necessary law enforcement agencies to gauge their demand. So not just it will increase the supply of equipments to the Indian armed forces, but will also help the interaction between industry and armed forces in order to estimate what kind of demands are there by the armed forces. So this is what region portal was all about. Now also recently the government came up with a positive indigenization list. Now this contains list of all the equipments that are not to be imported by India. So this list, as it highlights, also contains the equipments that are to be manufactured in India itself. Now this list contains many important weapon systems such as 155mm artillery guns, as well as main battle tanks which are used by Indian Army itself. So all those equipments that are mentioned in the positive indigenization list, they are not to be imported, but rather manufactured in India itself. Further, in order to develop India's defense sector, the government of India is trying to promote defense entrepreneurship in India, and these are done through many different initiatives, which are Defense India Startup Challenges, where startups, they are developing prototypes of important weapons in addition to sourcing funds from a technological development fund. Further, the government has also started the development of defense industrial corridors in two states, that are Tamil Nadu and Uttar Pradesh. Now, these are all the attempts to encourage defense entrepreneurship in India by providing them with funds, necessary infrastructure, and also help them develop prototype which will then be used by Indian armed forces to estimate whether these prototypes are beneficial for armed forces or not. So these were the initiatives that I have highlighted, which highlights that government intends to promote defense manufacturing in India itself. Now, in this regard, let us also discuss what are the constraints faced by the government in order to promote the self-reliance in defense industry, especially in India. Now, first challenge is there is lack of overarching organization in India's defense system, because most of the developments, they are undertaken by different bodies, be it defense research and development organizations, defense PSUs, as well as private sectors themselves. Now, if you realize these piecemeal developments that are taken by different companies, they are undertaken in what are known as siloed approach. So there is no overarching organization that will gauge what kind of different levels are there in companies and help them collaborate and reduce the duplication of efforts. So because of lack of overarching organization, the initiatives taken by different companies in India, they are undertaken in somewhat siloed approach, whereas on the other hand, we require a more of collaborative approach between different companies and Indian Armed Forces. Secondly, there is absence of an adequate comprehensive policy to gauge India's defense requirements and adequately scale up India's defense industry sector. Because first of all, India does not have a national security doctrine, which highlights the shortcomings in plannings of India's defense challenges in near to medium term. And also the Department of Defense production of Ministry of Defense, it only has a indigenization policy for spare parts itself. So because of lack of comprehensive policy and lack of proper estimation of India's security challenges, we face shortcomings in scaling up of India's defense sector in general. Now, this lack of comprehensive policy has also translated into what is known as skewed decision making in part of India's defense planners in general. Because most of the decision making done currently, they are top down in nature, which does not involve proper consultations with India's defense forces. So, whatever kind of procurement currently they are done by the government bodies, they are only done in order as a stopgap measures in order to deal with immediate challenges of the armed forces. But in order to have a proper manufacturing ecosystem in India, we need first of all to estimate what kind of needs are there for the armed forces and then manufacture all these equipments in India itself. So because of skewed decision making, all the measures that are currently taken are stopgap in nature and they are not comprehensive measures that could be beneficial for India's defense industry in general. Further, these defense projects, especially development of fighter aircrafts, battle tanks, these are long gestation projects and they take decades to come to fruition. So in this regard, technological delays on account of main battle tanks that are Arjun tanks as well as light combat aircraft that are Tejas, they have been developed by India's defense industry in few decades. But the delays that are being taken in developing these important platforms has resulted into a lag in technological development of India's armed forces on one hand and the technological developments of developed countries in general. Because for example, developing countries such as India, they are operating fourth and four and a half generation aircraft such as LCA Tejas. Whereas on the other hand, developed countries like US and China, they are operating fifth generation aircrafts. So in order to deal with current challenges, India also requires fifth generation aircraft, which is not there in terms of India's technological development is concerned. So because of technological delays in manufacturing and developing technologies, India currently lags behind the pioneer technologies worldwide. Further, most of the defense manufacturing in India, they are only taken by PSUs such as Kochi Shipyard Limited, which manufactured the aircraft, indigenous aircraft carrier. Whereas on the other hand, Madgaon Dock Limited, it manufactured Scorpion submarines in India. Also, other defense PSUs such as Bharat Earth Movers Limited, they are manufacturing various other defense equipments. So you can understand most of the indigenous manufacturing currently are undertaken by PSUs and government bodies. So in this regard, the private sector participation in India, it currently lags behind from that of other important countries. Because in countries such as US, most of the development of defense industry are undertaken by private sector. On the other hand, in India, the private sector, it lags behind in participation. So these were the 5 constraints that India is currently facing in terms of scaling up of its domestic manufacturing capabilities, that are lack of overarching organizations, absence of a comprehensive policy, and this absence has resulted into skewed decision making, technological delays, and absence or reduced private sector participation. So in this regard, you must be wondering, is there a possibility of scaling up of defense manufacturing in India or not? So let me tell you, there's also strategies that will help India promote self-reliance in India's defense sector in general. Now, the first suggestion in this regard is to enhance funding to not just of Indian armed forces, but also of defense research and development organization. Because primarily most of the cutting edge research undertaken in India, it is undertaken by the body called Defense Research and Development Organization. So in this regard, this body can be provided increased budgetary support in order to meet its research and development requirements. Further, 15th Finance Commission, it also highlighted the need of a defense modernization fund, which will be financed by tax income of the government. And this fund will be non-lapsable in nature, and hence it will help government address the lack of funding problems with respect to India's armed forces. Secondly, there's also a need to enhance India's capacity to undertake research and development. As I've already highlighted, most of India's defense research and development is undertaken by DRDO. So in this regard, the government has undertaken reforms in order to make DRDO as efficient as India's space research organization. Further, there's also a need to undertake a simplified procurement policy, because currently the procurement policy is not simplified and it has resulted into many delays in scaling up of Indian armed forces. The most important case in point is Indian Air Force, because Indian Air Force, it requires to retire its MiG-21 aircraft, and it wants to replace these aircraft with LCA Tejas. However, the Indian Air Force, it is not placing huge orders of these LCA Tejas on account of complex procurement policy. So this procurement policy should be simplified in order to promote the ease of procurement by Indian armed forces. Further, these bodies, they are manned by bureaucrats who are currently suffering from a bureaucratic mindset, because this leads to delays in decision making, which are on account of risk apprehension by bureaucrats. So there is an inherent need to unshackle the bureaucratic mindsets in not just India's defense ministry, but in also the bodies such as DRDO and other PSUs, in order to first of all manufacture the goods in India itself and then help procure these goods by Indian armed forces in general. So these were the strategies that are highlighted in the article in order to promote self-reliance in India's defense sector in general. So in this regard, now let us move to the second article of the day, which you can see appeared in the Hindu newspaper. Now this article is written by a Professor Happyman Jacob, whose article is very important from GS paper 2 perspective. So this article, it is important from India's UPSC GS paper 2 syllabus, because this article highlights India and its neighborhood relations. Further, questions related to China and its impact on India's neighborhood has been the subject of UPSC's question in the immediate past. Because in UPSC mains of the year 2017, we can see a question on China and its economic relations with India's immediate neighborhood. Now, recently, India's geopolitical stature worldwide has witnessed an immediate increase, because India recently hosted G20 meet in Delhi, in addition to being frequently invited to G7 meeting by Western countries. Additionally, India is also a member of multilateral bodies such as BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as Quad initiative, which is undertaken by US. So this highlights India's rising stature worldwide. Now, this rising stature has made India an alternative to China, especially in the Indian Ocean region, because USA's Indo-Pacific partnership highlights rise of India, especially in the Indian Ocean region. But today's article, it highlights that there is a paradox, which means that India is although rising globally, but its influence in its immediate neighborhood, that is South Asia, is on a relative decline. So this article highlights the reasons why is there a decline in India's influence, and it also highlights what should be the way forward for India to increase its influence in its immediate neighborhood. So let us first understand what are the reasons behind India's regional decline. Now, first of all, in recent years, we have witnessed gradual withdrawal of American influence in India's immediate and contemporary neighborhood, that is West Asia. Because first of all, currently, America, it is indirectly involved in two conflicts worldwide, that are wars between Russia and Ukraine on one hand, as well as the ongoing war between Israel as well as Hamas. Now, as USA, it is indirectly supporting Russia and Israel in their wars with Russia and Hamas respectively. So this has shifted the American attention away from India's immediate neighborhood. So this has what you can call created a void in India's immediate neighborhood, which is filled by geopolitical, economic and military rise of China. Because first of all, India's neighborhood countries, which are under various forms of tensions such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, they used to rely mostly on American support. However, after withdrawal of American support, they have sought refuge in rise of China. So this has created a loss of opportunity of India in terms of its domestic neighborhood. Further, political developments in India's recent neighborhoods such as Sri Lanka, Maldives, as well as Nepal, they also highlight that domestic policies in these countries, they either one way or the other favor the rise of China, because these countries, they intend to balance the rise of India by either hedging against India, collaborating with China, as well as bargaining with India at the cost of collaboration with China. So in order to balance the rise of India, these countries have resorted to support from China, be it Sri Lanka, as it has provided access to Chinese ships and submarines, or be it Maldives, which has currently cancelled contracts by Indian companies and has given the contracts to Chinese companies. So this highlights that India's geopolitical influence in its immediate neighborhood is on decline, and the corresponding influence of China is on rise. So these are the reasons of decline of India's influence in its immediate neighborhood. That first of all, America is withdrawing from its immediate neighborhood, and this has created a void in the neighborhood, which is then fulfilled by China. Further, domestic politics in countries such as Sri Lanka and Maldives, it also favors interacting more and more with Chinese companies and government at the cost of Indian government and companies. So in this regard, today's article, it also highlights the measures that should be taken by India to curtail the influence of China and increase its own influence in India's immediate neighborhood. First of all, we can understand that India should play to its own advantage by taking what you can call a pragmatic approach. Now, as I've already highlighted, India is a regional power in the Indian Ocean region, which means it is interacting with countries such as US in form of Indo-Pacific strategic dialogues. Now, the first measures in this regard is to capitalize India's maritime advantage. That although India is members of India is interacting with other countries in form of strategic dialogues. So in this regard, India can capitalize its maritime advantage by involving more and more small neighbors in these strategic dialogues themselves. Additionally, India should also not try to compete with China in absolute measures. So this will require India to forge partnership with external actors, such as it has done with respect to Japan and Sri Lanka, and with respect to Russia, as it has undertaken the development of Rupur nuclear power plant in the country of Bangladesh. So these are the examples of partnership that India has undertaken with external actors such as Japan and Russia in undertaking the development in India's immediate neighborhood. Additionally, India should harness its soft power to sustain and improve its influence in neighboring countries. For example, India can utilize its political and civil society to undertake conflict resolution in immediate countries. For example, in Myanmar, India is utilizing its influence in the northeastern region to undertake the conflict resolution between warring entities in the state of Myanmar. Additionally, the conflicts between Madhesis and the government of Nepal, it can be resolved by India's soft power and its influence over the country of Nepal. So, by capitalizing its maritime advantage, especially in the Indian Ocean region, by forging partnerships with external actors such as Japan and US, and harnessing its soft power to sustain influence by promoting informal conflict resolution, are the ideal way forward that should be undertaken by India in its immediate neighborhood. So, with this, we move to the third article of the day, which you can see appeared also in the Business Line newspaper. Now, this article highlights India's recent signing of free trade agreement with Australia, that is termed as Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, or ECTA. Now, this article highlights various benefits that are undertaken, especially by implementation of this free trade agreement between India and Australia. Now, this agreement, it is important from GS paper to syllabus because first of all, syllabus highlights bilateral agreement involving India and nor affecting India's interest. So, in this regard, let us understand what are the important provisions of this agreement and how it has benefited Indian economy in general. First of all, this free trade agreement, it provides reciprocal access to goods of both India and Australia to each other. Because first of all, goods that are manufactured in employment intensive industries in India, such as textile, engineering, jewels and jewelry sector, they are provided access in Australian markets. So it has increased India's exports in general, especially that of employment intensive industries. Further, Indian industries such as coal sector, thermal power generation sector, steel sector, they require large amount of coal supplies which can be achieved from Australian markets. So not just Indian agreement with Australia has provided access to Indian products in Australia, but it has also eased the imports of Indian Australian raw materials such as coal and other minerals to Indian markets. So this is what ease of access of goods for markets, especially in Indian and Australian markets, is all about. Also, India is a key exporter of service sector such as banking, construction, as well as business services, and the ease of these services have, and the Indian Australian agreement has also provided ease in movement of service professionals between India and Australia. Further, India is also known as a major manufacturer of pharmaceutical products. So, in this regard, the agreement between India and Australia has also provided increased market access for patented, generic, and biosimilar medicine that are manufactured in India currently. Also, this agreement has increased India's employment generation potential in general. Because in long term, this agreement it is expected to provide above 1 lakh jobs in India. In addition, 10 lakh jobs, in addition to provide over 1 lakh visas to Indian students in Australia. So you can understand, not just it creates employment in Indian industry, but it also increases the chance of Indian students to go to US and gain gainful employment in Australian markets. Further, this agreement has also increased India's exports in general, because India's iron and steel industry, it is witnessing increase in almost 16% of its imports. Whereas on the other hand, India's apparel sector, which is an employment intensive industry, it has increased its exports by about 6%. On the other hand, India's gems and jewelry sector, it has also increased about 6%. Whereas India's agricultural sector, it exports to Australia, has increased by over 15%. So you can highlight all these sectors. They are not just employment intensive sectors, but these are also major sectors that are responsible for increased India's export. So through signing of this free trade agreement between India and Australia, it has also increased countries' export, and it also increases the potential of generating more and more employment. So this was what benefits of India's free trade agreement with Australia is all about. So we move to next set of articles. So let us move to the next set of articles, the first of which appeared in the Indian Express. Now this article highlights that the High Court of Delhi, it has taken cognizance of use of a banned substance called oxytocin in Delhi's own dairies. Now this highlights an important banned substance called oxytocin, which is important from prelims perspective. Why? Because first of all, GS paper 3 syllabus highlights awareness in the field of biotechnology, and also previous year question in UPSC prelims, especially in the year 2022, highlights important compounds that have been in news and have been asked by UPSC in the prelims examination. So in this regard, let us first understand what is this oxytocin all about before solving the practice question. Now, this oxytocin is also known as love hormone or bonding hormone, which is produced in a gland called hypothalamus and is secreted by the pituitary glands. Now, this hormone, it is a hormone which also acts as a brain's neurotransmitter. Now, it is used in multiple areas. First of all, in medical science, it is used in uh, helping contract the uterus of a female and promote or induce delivery by controlling the bleeding and promoting the release of breast milk from mothers. So this compound, it is crucial in preventing new mothers from bleeding excessively after giving birth to a child. Now this excessive bleeding, especially during childbirth, it is a grave issue and it has resulted into death of many women in India. Also, this oxytocin is used in agricultural sector, as it is an adulterant which is used to increase the size of vegetables such as papayas or watermelons. And this is not just a naturally occurring substance, as it can be chemically manufactured in labs and either can be administered through an injection or through a nasal solution. Now, in terms of its dairy use, it was banned in 2018 as it was being misused in the cattle sector to increase the yield of milk animals. So, in this regard, let us now solve the practice question. With respect to oxytocin, consider the following statements. First statement, oxytocin, it acts as both as a hormone and as a brain neurotransmitter, which you can understand from our discussion is a correct statement. Second statement, oxytocin, it is produced in pituitary glands and it is secreted by hypothalamus of mammals. Now this is actually opposite, because the oxytocin, it is produced in hypothalamus in addition to be released in pituitary glands. So the second statement is incorrect. Now moving on to the third statement, oxytocin, it occurs naturally and cannot be synthesized in labs, which again is an incorrect statement as it can be either manufactured chemically or can be synthesized biologically. So as only first statement was correct, hence correct answer to this practice question is option A. Let us move to the next article which appeared in the explain section of Indian Express. Now, this article deals with a meteor shower which can be witnessed in the southern hemisphere, especially in the countries such as Australia and Indonesia. Now, this news article is important from GS Paper 3 syllabus because the syllabus itself highlights awareness in the field of space. Further, questions related to developments in the space sector or occurrence of various spatial events, it has been subjected to UPSC's question in the recent prelims that was in 2023. So this incidence, that is meteor shower, it is important from prelims perspective. So in this regard, let us discuss what are the various forms of spatial bodies that occur in our immediate neighborhood, that is in our solar systems. Now there are different types of bodies that are comets, asteroids, meteoroids, and meteors. So we'll discuss the difference between these spatial bodies or space objects. Now, the first in this regard is comet, which you can understand they are frozen leftovers in space. Now, these comets, they are either made of dust, rocks, or ice. Now, these bodies, they orbit around the sun in an elliptical manner and they heat up whenever they interact with any atmosphere. So these icy bodies, they release gas as they orbit sun because of interaction with atmosphere of different planets. Now closely related is the asteroid. However, whereas comet, they were dust constituted of dust, rock or ice. However, on the other hand, asteroids, they are rocky bodies made up of either rocks or various other minerals. Now these are rocky remnants which are smaller than the size of planet. However, they can be quite large, ranging in size from that of 10 meters to that of 350 meters. They can also be the size of few kilometers. Now, these asteroids, they are rocky remnant. They exist between the Mars and Jupiter, and they also revolve around the Sun. However, they are smaller than the Sun. Now, in this regard, let us understand the difference of closely worded meteoroid, meteorite, and meteors. Now, first of all, meteoroid, they are rocky remnants which are either made up of rocky or metallic fragments of asteroid, comet, or planet. Now, these are smaller in size as compared to asteroids. And when these meteoroids, they interact with atmosphere, so whenever these meteoroids, they burn up entirely, they are known as meteors. Wherever, or on the other hand, whenever these meteoroids, they reach the ground of an body, these are known as leftovers or meteorites. Understood? So meteoroid which burns up completely, they are known as meteors, and the remnant meteoroids which reaches the surface of any planet, these are terms as meteorite. Understood? So in this regard, let us now solve the practice question. With consider the following statements. The first statement, comets, these are rocky remnants from early formation of our solar systems, and they mainly orbit between the Mars and Jupiter. Now these are not comets, but these are asteroids. As comets, these are icy bodies and not rocky remnants of the India's or Earth's solar system. So the first statement here is incorrect. Now the second statement, meteorites, they completely burn up as they try to enter Earth's atmosphere due to atmospheric friction. Again, these are meteors and not meteorites, because meteorites, they reach the ground because they do not burn up completely. Understood? So in this regard, the second statement here also is incorrect because this statement highlights meteors and not meteorites. So the correct answer to this model question is option D because both the statements 1 and 2 are incorrect. Now let us move to the next article of the day, which highlights or are mentioned in the Business Line newspaper and highlights that globally the output of tobacco is on decline because major producers such as China, Brazil and Zimbabwe, they are reporting issues in their domestic tobacco production. Now India is the second most largest producer of tobacco worldwide after China. So in this regard, India will play a key role in meeting the demand and supply equations of tobacco in a worldwide manner. Now this tobacco, it is a major crop of India, thereby important from GS paper 3 perspective. Additionally, important organizations which are responsible for promotion of various crops such as tea board, it was a subject of UPSC's question in the year of 2022. So you can understand this news article, it is important from prelims perspective. But before solving the practice question, let us first understand the various nuances of tobacco cultivation, especially in that of India. Now this tobacco crop, it is originated in a tropical area. However, it is grown successfully not just in tropical but also in subtropical and temperate climates. Now, the ideal condition to grow the tobacco crop is that it requires about 100 to 120 days of frost-free climate, and it requires a temperature of around 27 degrees centigrade. Now, the rainfall required for growing of tobacco crop, it should be well distributed between 88 to 125 millimeters of rainfall every month. Now, in terms of soil, it requires warm climates and rich and well drained soil. So, in this regard, the cultivation of tobacco in India, it is undertaken in practically every state. But the largest cultivating state of tobacco in India, it is Gujarat, followed by Andhra Pradesh. As Gujarat is responsible for about 41% of total tobacco cultivation in India, whereas on the other hand, Andhra Pradesh, it is responsible for about 22% of total tobacco cultivation. Now, to promote the export and development of tobacco industry in India, Indian government has formed what was known as Tobacco Board of India, which is the statutory body formed under Tobacco Board Act of year 1975. And this body, it is headquartered in the city of Guntur, which is in Andhra Pradesh. So this was the basics of tobacco, and with this information, let us now solve the practice question. With reference to tobacco, consider the following statements. First of all, this tobacco, it is a native of South Asia. Although the origin of tobacco is somewhat controversial, but it is widely believed that tobacco, it originated in Caribbean islands and not in South Asia. So the first statement here is incorrect. Second statement, Andhra Pradesh, it is the largest producer of tobacco in India, which you can understand from our discussion is incorrect because Andhra Pradesh is second largest after the state of Gujarat. Now, Tobacco Board of India's headquarters, it is located in West Bengal, which is incorrect because it is located in the state of Andhra Pradesh, that is city of Guntur. Whereas on the other hand, Tea Board of India, its headquarters is located in the state of West Bengal. Understood? So as all these three statements are incorrect, hence option D is the correct answer to the model question. Now let us discuss the last article of the day, which also appeared in the Business Line newspaper, and today's news article, it highlights that the GST Appellate Panel's head has been appointed. Now this body, it is an important regulatory body which has some quasi judicial functions, hence it is important from GS paper 2 perspective. Additionally, various tribunals such as National Green Tribunal, it was asked by UPSC before in the prelims of the year 2018. So in this regard, the developments related to Goods and Services Appellate Tribunal, it is important from prelims perspective. So in this regard, let us understand the basics of GST Appellate Tribunal. Now, this Appellate Tribunal, it is a specialized authority which is formed to deal with GST related disputes. Now, it is important to note that this is a forum for second appeal in GST laws. Because first of all, whenever there is a dispute between a taxation body, that is GST body, and a tax paying individual, the dispute or the decisions to that dispute is given by a jurisdictional officer who is also known as adjudicating authority. Now, whatever decision, it is given by the adjudicating authority, and if the taxpayer it is unsatisfied by the decision, he or she can appeal the decision of adjudicating authority with that of appellate authority. So this is the first forum for appeal in terms of GST laws. And after the decision is given by appellate authority, and if the taxpayer is unsatisfied, then he or she can appeal the decisions with that of GST Appellate Tribunal. Hence, this is the second level or forum for appeal. Now, the decision of the GST Appellate Tribunal again is not full and final, because it can be again challenged with that of High Court and that in Supreme Court. So, in this regard, let us understand the important compositions of GST Appellate Tribunal. Because the National Bench of GST Appellate Tribunal, it is situated in the city of New Delhi, and it constitutes president, a judicial member, and two technical members, one of which are from state and another is from a center. Whereas the state benches of GST Appellate Tribunal consist of two judicial members and two technical members, one of which is from state and another one is from central. So in this regard, let us now understand or solve the practice question. With respect to following statements, consider the following statements with respect to dispute resolution mechanism under the GST Act. The first statement: orders passed by the adjudicating authority can be appealed at the appellate tribunal. Now, this statement highlights whether you can directly appeal the decisions of adjudicating authority with that of appellate tribunal. As I've already highlighted adjudicating authority, their decisions can be directly appealed to appellate authority, that is first forum for appeal. Now, GST Appellate Tribunal, it forms second forum, which means the decisions of appellate authority is only appealed towards appellate tribunal and not directly the decisions of adjudicating authority. So, first statement here is incorrect. Orders passed by appellate tribunals, they are final and binding on the parties. Now, as you can see from this flow chart, the orders of appellate tribunal, they can be again challenged in the higher courts, that are High Court and Supreme Court. So, the orders passed by appellate tribunals, they are not final in nature. As both of these statements here are incorrect, hence option D is the correct answer to this practice question. So this was all for today's discussion on GST's Appellate Tribunal and other important articles. So with this we conclude our today's DNS, and we'll see you again tomorrow 6 p.m. at sharp. So let us meet again tomorrow, and until then I bid you a very good night.